Do you think you got what it takes to build your own dream team?
And Owens with a move, and a foot race, and Owens inside the 23. Bombers won't catch him, and it's a touchdown.
We'll log in and play with the big boys.
Deep drop for Bo Mitchell, and a deep toss now. Downfield, and it is stride. Bo Price is going to take it to the house.
Partnered with Fantasy.ca, Rouge Radio presents the CFL Fantasy Podcast.
Has time, looking for Ernest Jackson, and whoop, that's down at the 5.
And now your CFL Fantasy Insiders, Dave Dawson and Rob Dalton.
Week 10 CFL Fantasy Football Podcast. Dalton and Dave for the new Rouge Radio. We'll be recording our regular podcast tomorrow night, but in the meantime, fantasy football, fantasy.ca is you can find your real fantasy football source. Don't fall for the imposters. Go for the real one, fantasy.ca. And Dalts, I guess starting off the show, we got some big news. Back-to-back wins for you in both leagues.
Yep, I'm just patting myself on the back, sipping some champagne, enjoying the life while it lasts, because I don't think I have what it takes to continue, but...
I think you do. I think you're the underdog. I think you're like everyone's calling the Riders to run the table and make the playoffs. I think that you're going to catch some people by surprise, head right into the playoffs.
Well, I hope so.
You're the best last place team I've ever seen in our fantasy football league.
Oh, I can sense a Tony rant from that one.
Lots of questions as we get every week on Twitter. We'll get to a few of those a little later on in the show. We'll get to your Twitter questions as well. We got quite a few of those, as we always do, and a bit of a shout out to someone in a Hamilton Ticats jersey, a receiver that I've had a lot of questions over the past couple of weeks, Dalts, and I guess, if anything, I think he listens to our podcast, Mr. Terrell Singfield.
Yeah, I'm just in the midst of reading the book that you wrote about him.
Back-to-back weeks. Terrell Singfield, Keith Shulgan continue to show us up, and we even got one mention from a guy on our Twitter feed asking to call a different player out, and we'll get to that in a sec. But in the meantime, last week's games, the Saskatchewan Roughriders are oh so close to snapping the Owen. But in the meantime, the top four performers for last week in your draft, or four performers that really stood out for me and my eyes. Brett Smith, if you're not in the team quarterback lead, Dalts, this guy really seems to, the first week that he played against Toronto, didn't look like a fluke. That big game he had, this one, it looks like he's the real deal.
Well, stats-wise, if you're looking at his stats as far as completion percentage and his touchdowns, it doesn't look too impressive, but fantasy points-wise, it looks like that he's a good guy to grab if you're in your own quarterback league.
Numbers-wise, for points, depending on your format, probably somewhere between 26 and 32 points last week at the quarterback position, so that's a good option there. He's one of the two quarterbacks I have. Eric Rogers, he's a slam dunk in every league. Everyone should have him. Another top performer last week as well as Terrell Singfield. A big 2 touchdowns and a very, very acrobatic, I guess, form, to say the very least. But he did disappear in the second half. We'll get to that a little bit later on. Darrell Walker, almost 200 yards receiving, and he looked kind of funny being winded towards the end of that game there. Hadn't seen action like that in a long time. So there's some big players for you, which leads us into Panic Mode Syndrome segment, which also was formerly known as Keith Shulgan Syndrome and was formerly known as Terrell Singfield Syndrome. Dylan B_27 wants us to call it what this week, Dalts?
He wants us to call it Rory Colhurt Syndrome.
We put up a question on Twitter and said, hey, it seems like each time we call a player out on Twitter or in our podcast, they come up with a big week the next week. So it's now Rory Colhurt Syndrome, thanks to Dylan B_27, who wants a big game out of Rory Colhurt this weekend. So Rory, the gauntlet is on your head. Thanks to Dylan B_27. So some guys, I think Terrell Singfield is one that you can pick him up if you're in a league. Again, Dalt's looking for some complimentary, some complement at receiver, but with injuries coming back, Singfield probably won't be a long-time roster player for the Ticats.
I think what it boils down to is that, yeah, he's getting some production out of him, but he's always going to be the last option. But for some reason, he was the first or second option the last couple of weeks.
Bakari Grant to be coming back from injury pretty soon, and you look at Andy Fantuz in a few weeks as well. So Terrell Singfield right now, he's an option, but it was an early statement. Caleros went to him 4 or 5 times in the first quarter and a half, and after that, he had 1 catch in the second half. So Sinkfield isn't a guy that I would jump to and jump on right now and say, ooh, got to pick the guy up. But sure, if you're in a deeper league, playing in a matchup, not a bad idea, especially with Hamilton being at home against Montreal this weekend. Sinkfield might not be a bad option there, but overall, long-term, Sinkfield's not a guy I want to grab. Dalts, another panic mode syndrome player right now. I've been getting quite a few questions on Twitter. Is a guy who carries the mail in Edmonton.
Yeah, Shakir Bell. Injury concerns, maybe in the Edmonton backfield, but at the same time, he's a guy that's not going to be out long-term, and his yards per carry is something that you might want to keep an eye on because he's going to get you some points at some time, but will he be healthy enough?
The question I'm getting a lot right now is that since his touches went down, he's fumbling. People are concerned that he may be coming off the roster in favor of Chad Simpson. Simpson should be back by Labor Day, but right now Shakir Bell is the guy, and he's got that game-breaking speed, and many are calling him Archie Whitlock right now with his tendency to fumble. But Shakir will be playing this weekend and against the Toronto Argonauts run defense, so it's not the greatest run defense in the world, but definitely one that is easily able to be exposed by the Eskimos. Nick Lewis, another panic mode syndrome guy who I wouldn't be running too quickly to pick that guy up if I was you.
No, I mean, especially with the quarterback situation and the coaching carousel that's going on in Montreal. Anybody on offense in Montreal is a good idea to stay away from.
Jasper Simmons, the final panic mode syndrome player. Yeah, he got signed by the Bombers, but he's mostly going to be playing special teams. So I wouldn't be too concerned about it right now, would I?
No, the way that defense operates, and I said it before, they kind of filter the run away from the middle linebackers. So even if he does come in to replace Sam Hurl on the occasional play, I don't imagine that they're going to alterate that playbook in the defensive side just for Jasper Simmons.
Guys to add, and I think he made a statement his first game back after missing a number of weeks. Corey Greenwood in the linebacking core for the Argos. What do you like about this guy?
He's got the nose for the ball, and this is a guy that and he's Canadian to boot. So you know that they're going to start him in whatever position in the linebacking core. And he's a nice complement to the defensive line in Montreal, Toronto, especially with the likes of Tristan that guy, as well as Cleon Lang and Ricky Foley.
Corey Greenwood, 5 tackles, as well as a fumble recovery last weekend in his first game back at the linebacking position for the Toronto Argonauts. And Thomas Miles, another Canadian guy he played alongside, looked pretty good last week as well. Staying in the defensive side of the ball for the Argos, Owusu Ansah could be the answer to any secondary woes you have in your fantasy football draft right now. He just continues to put up points, Dalts.
Yeah, and I like this Toronto defense. And again, this is all having to do with the kind of schemes that they have with there. And Casey Crean likes to rush to the quarterback, which really forces the quarterback to make some mistakes.
And as much as the offense is going to be, defense is going to be getting eaten up for yards, there'll be a lot of guys making tackles in the linebacking core and in the secondary as well. So not the most powerful, prolific defense out there, but one that can force you into making some mistakes, as Owusu Ansah could be a good pickup for you as well. Aaron Laverius in Montreal. Even though John Bowman could be getting back in the roster sometime in the near future, who knows? We'll see what happens there. Laverius is a guy who's impossible to take out of the lineup.
Yeah, we saw what he was able to do when he returned from a lineup, and I don't even think that John Bowman is going to be that kind of that player that's going to be able to take Laverius out. And we saw what he was able to do against a good offensive line in BC. Who would have thought that we would have said that? Whatever Montreal is going to throw at, I believe they're facing this Zach Claros this week. Man, that Hamilton offensive line's got a big problem.
Laverius, converted from linebacker to defensive end, good pickup. And another guy in Hamilton, speaking of Hamilton's tough task, Mike Daly last week. 2 picks. No big deal, Craig Butler. Please stay out as long as you can, said Mike Daly. He's looking good.
Yeah, in the short span that he's been playing, he's already accumulated 53 points in fantasy points, which is why I grabbed him in one of my leagues. So hopefully Craig Butler can stay out a little bit longer because I could use a little bit Mike Daly, getting some returns for touchdowns and some heavy-duty tackling as well.
Mike Daly be calling Kevin Glenn and asking him, how do you keep a guy to the lineup? Give me your secret. Maybe a little Nancy Kerrigan going on there in the locker room. Guys to avoid, even though he's on the bye week this week, a couple of BC players you want to make a note of. If he's on your roster, I wouldn't expect him to have a breakout performance, or he may have a big game, but long term, he could be the forgotten guy in the BC Lions receiving core, and I mean number 85.
Yeah, Sean Gore, he's a good receiver. He knows how to get open, but with the emergence of Austin Collie and A.C. Leonard, I'm not too sure what Sean Gore is going to be doing in the next couple of weeks, much less within the next couple of years.
Kareem Smith is another guy. Numbers are way down this year. Tackles are into the 40 last year. It's the halfway point of the season. He's only got 11 tackles and now 3 sacks because he had 2 last game. Kareem Smith is a guy I want nowhere near of.
Yeah, and again, this all has something to do with schematics and who you have playing. If I'm going to grab anybody from the BC defensive line, it's going to be Craig Rowe, who seems to be having a nose for the quarterback every week that he seems to play.
Final guy I want to avoid is Dalts, and I did touch him, the panic mode syndrome, Fred Stamps. Even though he's a big player, even though he's got the game-breaking potential, and even though Anthony Calvillo right now will be working with Rakeem Cato, I think that there's going to be some bumps and bruises continually along the offensive way in Montreal. Fred Stamps is the guy I want to avoid.
Yeah, all you have to do is say Montreal offense, and that's all you need to know, and that's who you avoid. Anything from Cato to the offensive line. The offensive line's not an issue, and I don't really believe play calling's an issue. It's just a veteran talent that's not being veteran talent, and everybody on that offensive side, with the exception of the offensive line, should be dropped if you haven't already.
Well, I wouldn't say drop, but definitely held on to, and running backs are probably the lone exception with Rutley and Sutton, a pretty good 1-2 punch. And as we get into the Twitter questions, we have a lot of them this week. Where do we start?
Well, Future Kong, Donkey Kong, 5K says Kyrie Sebear or Travis Brown, who will get more points for the rest of the season?
Whew. Tough one, Dalts. What do you figure?
You look at the possibility, and as we just touched on Montreal with their offense being on the field. So do you trust Kyrie Sebear being on the field more and being tired but still getting some tackles, maybe some hits, forced fumbles, or do you get Travis Brown, who is more reliable and consistent in Ottawa's defense?
I look at Kyrie. They both have injury concerns. That's the thing I look at. Kyrie Sebear, in the last 2 seasons, I just look at him and think, big player capability. He's got the ability to, he would average 5, 6. You're expecting him to have a sack in there, maybe a pick or 2. Look at his stats last year: 64 tackles, 2 sacks. Year before that, 68 tackles and 9 sacks. Like, he's got the ability to be an absolutely fantastic football player, but can he stay healthy? That's what I'm looking at. Travis Brown, coming off the 6th game, moving into that Ottawa secondary. He's got some competition. Malik Jackson, Damasio Munoz. Will he be full-time, rotated in and out of the secondary? Who knows? I'm a big Travis Brown fan. I drafted him pretty high in my at the start of the year there, and then he got injured. But Dalts, I would argue, I want to see Kyrie Sebear just because. And here's the lone reason why I would say avoid Kyrie Sebear. Number one, because of what's going on in Montreal, you never know if there could be changes coming around the corner. Number 2, Kyrie Sebear's injury concerns. Not big concerns, but I'm saying the potential that he could come out of the lineup. I honestly see Travis Brown as a guy, potentially, that I would keep long term, but if you're looking at the 2 of them side to side, this is a long form and answer for your question. Thank you very much for the question, whoever it was, which Dalts will add that at the end. I think it was Donkey Kong 5K. Thank you very much. I would honestly say, even because of that, keep Kyrie Sebear. Dalts, would you agree?
I would go with Travis Brown just because the way that Kyrie Sebear plays, he may not be as dominant, he may not be as effective just because he might want to avoid suspensions and whatnot. So that's my reason.
You convinced me. I was just thought of that. Suspensions. Excellent. Go with Travis Brown. Thank you very much, Donkey Kong 5K. Next.
Brandon Soares 64 says, both have been quite disappointing so far. Who would you rather have going forward, Denmark or Sinkfield?
Ooh. I love that question. That's probably my favorite question that I've seen in a couple of weeks. That's a tough one because Clarence Denmark has been completely avoided in the Bombers receiving core this year, Dalts, and being the guy who's in Winnipeg, I'll let you take the reins on that one.
Yeah, and you're just waiting for Clarence Denmark to come out with that breakout game where he's just going to come out of that slump, especially with a backup quarterback with Robert Marv at the helm. Terrell Sinkfield, have we seen his ceiling? Is he going to be coming out of the lineup because of where he's situated on the depth chart? You know what? To be honest with you, I would go with Denmark just based on the reasoning is that there's nobody on this Bomber roster that can unseat Clarence Denmark. He may not get the throws, but there's nobody on that depth chart that can. Terrell Sinkfield, though, on the other hand, in Hamilton, you got 2 or 3 people who can.
And that's the problem with Terrell Sinkfield. T.Y. Hilton syndrome, same as in the NFL. T.Y. Hilton, you have him on your roster. You go, yeah, T.Y. Hilton had 9 touchdowns one game, and then you don't see him again for 10 weeks. So Terrell Sinkfield, game-breaking potential. He's a fantastic football player. He can break a game wide open, much like Clarence Denmark can, but right as Dalts said, no one's going to unseat him. Right now, the halfway point of the season, Clarence Denmark is only on pace for 672 yards. He had 1,080 last year, 900 the year before. However, I think once Marcel Belfay gets used to using Robert Marv's skill set the way that he can, Denmark will become a game player. What do you figure, Dalts?
I agree. I think this all comes down to play calling, and once that improves, or once it becomes more consistent, Clarence Denmark will become more efficient and a little bit more relaxed in that offense.
Next question.
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah, no, that was going to. Natonic17 says, would dropping Bell and picking up Jeremiah Johnson be a not bad idea? And I guess we kind of talked about that before. Yeah,
that's a tough way to go. I think that's a loaded question. And here's the facts on Jeremiah Johnson. Shakir Bell does have a tendency to fumble. He has been called out by his coach a number of times. Shakir Bell is a game-breaking running back. However, just to go alongside of that, Jeremiah Johnson is going to get you touchdowns because Jeremiah Johnson is the guy they're going to use on the 3-yard line. He's not going to rush for 160 yards, but he could get you 40 yards and 2 touchdowns, where Shakir Bell could get you 10 carries and 97 yards and no touchdowns. Would that be a fair way to assess that, Dalts?
I think you took the words out of my mouth. Yeah, that's the way that I would think about it.
Man, that's what working together for is this long. That's the benefits of that. And here's the other thing. The Eskimos don't have a bye week until week 19 or week 20. That's the other thing the other thing you got to factor into this whole scenario, where the Red Blacks do have a bye coming up in 2 weeks. So Jeremiah Johnson can get a little bit of a rest or Labor Day weekend there, and Shakir Bell, he's got Chad Simpson looking around his corner. The Eskimos signed a new running back this week as well. So the days could be numbered for Shakir Bell. So right now, if it's between Jeremiah Johnson and Shakir Bell, I don't know about dropping Shakir Bell if you can be able to move him, but you look at who Ottawa's going to be facing over the next couple of weeks: Saskatchewan's defense, BC Lions run defense, Saskatchewan's defense, the Argos run defense, and then they get into Montreal. But then you have the Eskimos. Who the Eskimos got? Toronto's run defense. Okay. Then Calgary's run defense. Then Calgary's run defense. Then Hamilton's run defense. So Shakir Bell, if he still has a job on September 26th, that is the next time he'll be able to play a defense where he can get points, which is the BC Lions. So I think if that answers your question at all, breaking it down stats-wise, Jeremiah Johnson might be a better option right now. Next question, Dalts.
Last question, John Mason. John Mason 777 says, you still say to keep Kendall Lawrence over Tyrell Sutton.
Dalts, what do you think?
You know what? These are 2 players right now that are kind of in awkward situations on the respective club. Kendall Lawrence, there's no health concerns, but he's kind of being usurped by Chad Simpson and Shakir Bell, even though that Shakir Bell has the issues. Tyrell Sutton is also in a similar situation, although he's only got one person, competing for a spot, and that's Brandon Rutley. And I know there's injury concerns, but they're still there. Again, I'm going to go with the fact that Montreal is kind of unknown right now, so I'm going to go with Kendall Lawrence in this one if given the option.
Yeah, I think Chris Jones is probably going to try and use Kendall Lawrence again in a slot back role, where he'd been taken out of that the past couple of weeks. So again, there is the potential of that. However, as Dalts mentioned, you look at who Montreal's facing. Aside from the Ticats run defense this week, they have the BC Lions. Then they're on bye. Then they have the Bombers. And then they've got Saskatchewan. And then they got Ottawa. So there's potential for Montreal running backs to put up some points. And the difference being, Kendall Lawrence is going to get you 50, 60, 70, 100 yards receiving, plus 30 yards in sweeps and maybe a touchdown. Tyrell Sutton is going to get you consistent yards. But Kendall Lawrence, is he going to get those consistent? Is he going to get touches all the time? He's going to get targets, but will he continually get those targets? If that makes any sense whatsoever. Where Tyrell Sutton, you look at how he played against BC, he's going to be against run defenses. They're going to allow him to do that again and again. And if they continually have problems in the receiving core that Montreal is right now, because the only guy catching balls are S.J. Green and Alex Charette with a smattering of Nick Lewis, they're going to lean heavily on the run game, and that's Tyrell Sutton, and that is Brandon Rutley. So, I like Kendall Lawrence mainly because I'm trying to justify keeping him on my roster. That's probably why I'm still talking. But I think overall, between the two of them, I would say Tyrell Sutton.
And that's all the questions we have this week.
That's all the questions we have. Follow us on Twitter at CFL Fantasy RR. Follow our main podcast at Rouge Radio Dalts, at Rouge Dalts, and myself at Dave Dawson 7. And as we've been saying the past couple of weeks, take a look at when your playoffs start. Talk to your commissioner. Find out which 3 weeks are your playoffs, because that'll determine where you want to keep, which guys you want to keep, and you might be too heavy on a few different teams, and be sure that they're not going to be on the bye when you are in the playoffs. Labor Day weekend is coming up soon. Another 4 games and 4 nights action this weekend. And then, Dalts, I know one thing that we're all in agreement over. These Thursday games are fun, but it screws up our week so bad.
God, it's sometimes Thursday happens and it feels like Saturday.
I don't even know what day of the week. Just have football games on all 7 days of the week. I think I'm okay with that. But thanks for your questions. Continue to fire those questions in, and we'll do our best to answer them in quickest order as possible. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next week.